We do a lot. We do a lot of outreach. I'm not even sure if these numbers are up to date, but certainly in the last decade or so, have reached over 175,000 people doing trainings like this. They used to be a little more in person all across the country. And our hands-on work and our policy work and our advocacy work has led to more than 1.5 million acres of pollinator habitat on the ground in the last, say, 10 years or so. So feel pretty proud of the work that that team of folks has done. And yeah, everything from hands-on conservation planning on an individual farm to working on the Farm Bill and conservation policy nationwide. It's been a good ride. So tonight, let's dig into the meat of this. Tonight, we are going to talk about pollinator conservation. And one thing I've been doing a little bit more and more of as time goes on is to think about, I want to give you all some background on the importance of pollinators, the importance of invertebrates. I want to talk about their diversity and habitat needs. And I want to do that in a way that's really, it's telling stories. The reason I got into entomology and studying insects, the reason I got into conservation is that I just find the stories of insects are just like the stories of people. They are fascinating and diverse and interesting. And I feel like the more we know about those stories, the more we can appreciate insects, to be sure, and pollinators in this case specifically, but also the more we can feel sort of that connection and know what to do, know what we're looking for, know how to read a landscape, whether it's our backyard or our back 40. So we'll talk about the diversity and habitat needs of bees, kind of dive into the pollinator conservation basics, but then talk kind of throw in what I call sort of pollinator conservation 2.0, kind of what are some things we can think about to really take that extra step or look at our landscapes just with a little bit finer detail. And then we'll spend some time doing questions and see where we go. All right, that's the next 40 minutes or so. So let's get right into it. So let's talk about the importance of pollinators. I feel like it's important to kind of set the groundwork, kind of know why is it that we're focused on this. So I think it's important to know that 85%, really more than 85% of flowering plants, they need an animal. It's usually an insect to move pollen from one flower to the next in order to set seeds, set fruit, to basically reproduce. And bees, which I'll come back to again and again, are the biggest player in that pollination equation. So that ecosystem service that pollinators provide, that enables those plants to produce fruits and seeds. This is 35% or more of crop production worldwide. These crops are valued, in the past have been estimated to be valued at $18 to $27 billion in the US, more than $217 billion worldwide. And these are now getting to be dated figures. This goes back to the 2000s. So I think these are just going up. If you think about our vitamins and minerals, those mostly come from insect pollinated fruits and vegetables. And we estimate 1 in 3 mouthfuls of that food and drink that we consume can be traced back to a pollinator. So this includes fruit and vegetables, but this also includes oils, sunflower oil, canola oil, things like that. It includes any dairy or milk that's, from cattle or sheep or goats or whatever it might be, fed on alfalfa. To produce alfalfa hay, you need alfalfa seed. To produce alfalfa seed, you need pollinators. And so if we look at our whole food system, I begin to wonder sometimes if that 1 in 3 is actually a bit of an underestimate. And we did a fun little experiment at Whole Foods several years ago. We went into the produce department and took a picture at 2 o'clock in the morning with everything stocked, and then removed all the insect pollinated fruits and vegetables, and had a good time sort of demonstrating, how basically the produce department becomes a little bit sad after you take away the pollinators. And maybe I shouldn't be laughing. So yeah, it's dramatic how much of that produce ultimately goes away. And it's not just food for us, right? So all those fruits and seeds, they're a major part of the diet for pretty much all birds and lots of mammals. Pollinators themselves and other invertebrates that we support when we create high quality habitat, that's food for wildlife. That's food for 89% of birds. You know, if you like songbirds, you need insects and the fruits and seeds. If you like game birds, you know, if you hunt grouse or things like that, we can triple grouse production in a landscape if we have abundant wildflowers that are supporting abundant butterflies and moths, so that those young chicks have got food to feed on as they are growing. And so when we think about pollinator habitat, it's just a really useful framework for thinking about just really good wildlife habitat conservation. And at the same time that pollinators are so important, we know that many of them are experiencing some pretty alarming and rapid declines all across the US and in fact across the world. So for example, we know that at least 28% of bumblebee species in the United States are threatened with some sort of, you know, conservation risk, threatened with some sort of local or broad extinction. You know, we've got species like the rusty patch bumblebee and the Franklin's bumblebee, I should add to this, that are, you know, recently listed as endangered. Over 17% of North American butterflies are at some risk of extinction. And if I just I realized I should have updated this for the Western monarch too. The Eastern monarch butterfly population has declined 90% since the 1990s. The Western population, which is actually potentially or used to send butterflies to you all, say in Lake County, Montana, as you know, suffered a 99, 98, 99% decline. And this year we just had a big press release to announce that we've seen a little boost. That population went from the tens of millions to 2,000 or less the last 2 years. And this year is bumped up to maybe 240, 250,000 individual butterflies. So it's a good sign for right now, but to go from tens of millions to 2,000 and then just jump up to 200, even that 200,000 is, you know, a pretty dramatic decline of, you know, 94, 95% from what it was at its height maybe 40 years ago. So anyway, these critters are not doing so great across the landscape. So that, therefore, I think it's, you know, it's worth us spending some time understanding the diversity of native bees, the diversity of these pollinators, their individual stories, so that we can think about how in our homes and gardens and farms and ranches, we can, you know, take some action to help turn these trends around locally. So let's start. Now, when we talk about pollinators, there are a whole number of different groups that are out there pollinating, you know, wildflowers and garden flowers and crops, etc. You've got your butterflies and your flies, you've got moths, you've got wasps and beetles, but really our bees are the workhorse. Like, these are the group of insects that are doing the bulk of that pollination and really just making it happen. And this is for a number of reasons that I think are worth kind of thinking about. They collect and transport pollen. So our bees are, you know, vegetarians. All they eat is pollen and nectar. And by collecting pollen to bring back to feed to their young, they are, you know, doing a great job of basically, you know, moving that pollen from flower to flower and doing the work we want them to do. They'll also forage in the area around a nest. So if we've got a landscape where we've got nesting resources as well as pollen and nectar forage, they're going to stay in that area. They're going to do well in that area. They're going to grow in that area. And if you're a gardener, if you're a farmer, you know, trying to get them to foster those nests in that landscape is really, really important and really helpful for making this happen, you know, making this happen on the ground. The last thing that I think is really important to understand is flower constancy. So these pollinators are really smart and they understand how to basically, you know, collect pollen, collect nectar from a flower. So how to work that flower, how to work it, you know, collect the pollen from it, and in so doing, really most effectively, do the service of pollination. And therefore they don't kind of go from, you know, from one species to another, which has the chance to potentially undermine the ability. Well, it just means you don't have any pollination. Let's see. So let's go on here. And when most people think of a bee, you know, they typically think of black and white, yellow, black and yellow. And actually, hold on 1 second. Give me Oops, sorry about that. I got something caught in my throat. Let's see now. So yeah, when you think of a bee, usually thinking black and yellow and striped, definitely not thinking this vertical stripes, although I think this is pretty funny. A lot of people sometimes, get bees confused with wasps and mix that up. So this is a yellow jacket. A lot of people think of yellow jackets as bees, but they're quite different. I mean, it's a really different animal. These are carnivores that feed on meat. That's what they feed to their young, hence why they come to your turkey sandwich or salmon, whatever it might be that you're cooking up on the grill. I mean, they usually feed on caterpillars and other soft-bodied insects, but they are definitely not bees. Bees are, and then we've got, honeybees, that stands out. Honeybees are critical, really important pollinators. But it's a European species introduced from Europe for crop pollination and honey production in the US, and super different from our native species. The idea of a queen with tens of thousands of workers where you could do something like make a bee beard. This is very different from all of the thousands of native species that we have here in the United States. Not that honeybees aren't important and kind of fun to keep and whatnot, but if we're focusing on, sort of all this pollinator biodiversity, they're pretty unusual. So native bees, there are roughly 3,600 species in the US, and they come in a huge range of sizes, shapes, and colors. But when we think about doing pollinator conservation, when we think about supporting this diversity on the ground and what their different, say, habitat requirements are, really you can look at this and think of them as just three groups. You've got ground nest, think of them as three like ecological or habitat oriented groups. You've got ground nesting solitary bees, you've got tunnel nesting solitary bees, and then you've got our bumblebees. They're kind of like our classic social, bee with a queen in a colony. So I'm going to walk through each of these groups. And what I want to do as I do this is just show a whole bunch of pictures of the different kinds of bees that you might see in your garden or your farm, that sort of fit into each of these categories. So I'm going to start quickly with the life cycle of a solitary bee. So as you can tell by the name solitary, these are bees that are really, the females are doing the work of provisioning a nest all by themselves. There's no sisters or colony to work with. And they typically spend the bulk of the year in an underground nest. That's where they're, spending most of their time. But they'll emerge from that nest, maybe like this mining bee here. They'll come out in springtime, and she will mate with the male bee and then go about the work of basically digging and provisioning a whole new nest. So she'll dig a tunnel underground in the case of ground nesting bees, collect a whole bunch of pollen and nectar, lay an egg on that pollen and nectar. That egg will hatch into a larva, feed on that big ball of nectar and pollen underground, eventually pupate there, and then kind of hibernate until the right time the next year, and then come out and repeat this whole cycle. And so about 70% of our native bees are going to nest underground, and on the surface, they might just look like ant nests or something. You might not even notice them. But underneath, they're going to have these amazing architecture depending on the species, like a whole bunch of, tunnels and cells like this, or maybe they're all lined up. You can find them in turf, but they're usually in bare, sort of exposed soil, especially if it's south facing. They like those sandy to loamy soils that are a little bit better drained, a little drier, but also need a little bit of clay to make sure they hold together. And like I said, you can find them on south facing or slopes or sunny areas. These are the sorts of places where you might find these bees in the landscape. And if we look underground, like here's somebody did some excavating to show what this nest looks like. You can go down many inches, to get to these cells that are buried, underground. Here's the tunnel that she would have dug to create this nest. So they can be a few centimeters to, in some places like a meter or more deep underground. They're going to line these cells with a waxy secretion that can sometimes even withstand flooding. Like this is actually under a vernal pool in California. So this is underwater for a few months every year, which is kind of cool. And then they come out and do their thing. Here's just poking her head out of a hole. And they, if you've got boulders in the garden or rocks, it's not unusual to find them nesting in the cracks underneath there. Or again, it's maybe a little warmer, a little drier. We'll find them in lawns. And you'll see them if you find these little holes, or you see animals like little bees flying in and out. you might just even see a little head poking out. And there's a tremendous diversity of these. I'm just going to kind of give a little tour of some of the common ones that are out there. You might have little tiny sweat bees out there, just little black bees that are going to be nesting in the ground. You might see these active in the summertime. You might see slightly bigger sweat bees where they're going to have a few more stripes on them. Again, these are going to be ground nesting, mostly active in the summer. Some of these even have multiple generations, so you can have some buildup over time rather than just doing one life cycle per year. Some of these sweat bees will have 2 or 3, which is kind of cool. You might have these bright green metallic sweat bees. You might have green striped metallic sweat bees. You might have mining bees. These often come out more in the springtime. Sometimes they're called the tickle bees. And they can just have these big balls of pollen and nectar under their legs. And they're called the tickle bees. Well, mostly it's because I'm sitting across the street from this field that you can see here, where every springtime, all these tiny little dots that you see here, literally tens of thousands of bees come out of this schoolyard. And if you look closely, it's just a little pile of excavated soil. And if you look even closer, you've got these little bees that come in, and the kids love them and have named them the tickle bees because you can grab them and pick them up and handle them and throw them at each other. And I don't know, it's pretty cute. They go running around. They've kind of made it a mascot for the school. So you can have a ton of these coming out, and these are really active in the springtime. In fact, springtime is a big time for ground nesting bees because you can have big colony aggregations of these, like I said, tens of thousands in this one school field. So it's something to look out for. Later in the summer, you might see, particularly on sunflowers, you might see longhorn bees, which are just crazy looking. Sometimes you'll even see these bees nesting or sleeping, I should say, in flowers at night, which is pretty fun. They come in, they look, I don't know, you'll often see these out in sunflower. I like growing sunflowers just to be able to see sleeping bees, because you'll have all sorts of longhorn bees and sunflower bees and even bumblebees nest, spending the night out in the flowers. Okay, so those are our ground nesting solitary bees. We also have our tunnel nesting solitary bees. This is maybe another 30% odd of all of our native bee species. And these ones are going to nest in hollow or pithy plant stems, maybe like old beetle borer tunnels and wood, maybe man-made cavities, some of them even in old snail shells. And if you look inside these tunnels, you'll again see that ball of pollen and nectar with the eggs laid on it. This is a mason bee here, so you've got these walls separating the cells made of mud. And sometimes, they'll use all sorts of different things to create, separate those nest cells inside those tunnels. So I mentioned mud. They might use sawdust, leaf pieces, resins, plant fibers, all kinds of stuff. And it's pretty fun. Like if you've got, I don't know, a red bud or a wild cherry, I've seen wild rose, I've seen snowberry. If you see leaves where all of a sudden you start to see circles and then ovals cut out of the leaf margin. Here's another one. Again, here's a cherry with ovals and circles, just all cut really meticulously from the edge. You got leaf cutters somewhere nearby. They're pretty cool. And they're out there. They'll come. If you're lucky, when you start to see that, you may even see them come and actually cut those pieces and take them away. So for our tunnel nesting bees, mason bees, a lot of people know about those. They come out in the springtime. They're going to separate those cells in those tunnels, using mud. Just a couple more pictures of mason bees. Leafcutter bees are one of my favorites. They just have a lot of personality. And they're active spring and summer, depending on the species. And like I said, they're going to use leaf pieces. Sometimes they'll use petals from flowers. That can be pretty nice, like pink petals you'll all of a sudden see under a flower pot or something. And they all carry their pollen on the bottom of their abdomen, which is, I think, pretty, I don't know, it's pretty charming. You can see them, sometimes gathering these leaf pieces and carrying them back. I don't know, they just got a lot of personality. And you've got, then you've got small carpenter bees, another tunnel nester. They really like pithy stems. They're a lot smaller. This is a tiny little bee. And while it's not maybe as charming as this little critter, flying around looking kind of big and tough, they can be really common. And, it's easy to find them in a lot of places. If you grow an herb garden and have oregano in bloom, oh my goodness, you almost certainly have got little carpenter bees coming to visit it. Now, our last group. So if we're thinking about our 3 groups, ground nesting solitary, tunnel nesting solitary, and then our social bumblebees, This is our small group of bees, maybe 57 species in North America. These have got a social colony founded by a single queen every springtime, or at least, spring, early summer, depending on the species. These colonies only last for one season, and a nest by the time it's at its peak may only have 100 to 300 odd workers. And this cycle, if we imagine right now, those queens are overwintering, so they're hibernating just like a little bear. And then she'll come out sometime in the springtime, start a new nest where she needs some sort of a small cavity. She'll make a couple of little wax pots of pollen and nectar, lay some eggs in one of those wax pots, and then just brood on it, just like a chicken. Eventually, those eggs hatch into workers, and they help provision the nest as the nest grows and gets bigger. And by the end of the life cycle of the season of the bumblebee, the workers will die. They'll raise new queens and new male bees that will mate out in the flowers. And then those big new queens that are mated have to go find themselves a new place to hibernate for the winter. So those nests that they're going to make are going to be in abandoned rodent burrows, maybe under lodged grasses, any sort of tucked away little cavities that are relatively protected from the environment. And then those queens need someplace to overwinter, someplace under where they can dig underground. And I'm going to come back and talk more about this a little bit later in the talk. But we need to think about both nesting and where they're going to overwinter, and of course food, which we'll come back to in a little bit. Yeah, so they nest in those existing cavities and wild areas. They need those overwintering places to where they can shelter. So those are the kind of the key things to think about for bumblebees. Oh, and there's here a few bumblebee pictures, different species, yellow-faced bumblebee. I call this the red rump bumblebee, Melanopygus. It's a pretty one. They're just some really beautiful bees out there. All right, as we dig in now, I think, it's useful. We've got this framework for thinking about at least the bees, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about bumblebees and some other critters too. But I think understanding kind of this framework of nesting, overwintering, that helps us understand then how do we take action to do sort of pollinator conservation and turn it and really have it be kind of the most rewarding and most successful, do this as successfully as we can. And so, as most of you probably know at this point, if you're involved or interested in pollinators, there are really kind of fundamentally three big things we need to think about. And I'll add a fourth one at the end, but there are three big things we need to think about that I want to walk through with a few hacks on top of it on how we can sort of tweak these to be even better. So we need to think about food. So this is nectar, this is pollen. If we're thinking about butterflies, immediately we think about host plants, but I want us to also think about host plants, quote unquote, from a bee perspective too. I'm going to come back to that. Shelter, nest sites, overwintering sites. I'm going to come at this again and again, and also talk a little bit more about how to think about this and give you some ideas for implementing this on the ground. And then protection. This is protection from pesticide risk. This is also protection from other kinds of disturbance, mowing, fire, heavy grazing. We need to think about how to create habitat and then have that habitat maintained over time, but also protected from either insecticide exposure or fungicide exposure or other types of disturbance. So let's just dig in. We're going to talk just kind of big picture, because with your conservation district and Lake County so actively engaged, you all have got a lot of resources already at at your disposal to help you out. But big picture, when we think about providing food for pollinators, we need to have flowers. Good bee-friendly, pollinator-friendly flowers from late in the winter, early spring, all the way through mid to late fall. Xerxes, we tend to focus our energy on native plants. Certainly when we're thinking about overall biodiversity, they are best. They sort of have the biggest bang for the buck. However, that's not to say, and I'll come to this maybe even in a second. Oh yeah, I will in a second. That doesn't mean I'm not against that I'm against garden plants. I mean, let's face it, we live in a built environment. My mom loves her cosmos and her lavender, which I think is great. Even with our sort of more ornamental plants, I think it's pretty fun if we've got echinacea or lavender, or cosmos, sedum, sunflowers, whatever it might be, zinnias, for goodness sake. We can choose even those sort of, garden plants that have got a benefit for pollinators. Heck, not to mention the clover in our yard or the alfalfa in our field. But, you know, if we're really focused on trying to maximize the diversity of pollinators, yeah, focusing on where we can, really putting that attention to native plants, I think is, you know, the most important thing to think about. Now, I originally had this as kind of a food 2.0, but really it's not. It's more like 1.5. You know, thinking about host plants for butterflies is really important. You know, and I use milkweed here as an example, just because, I mean, it's just this rock star plant. Not only is it a critical host plant for feeding monarch butterfly caterpillars, but those flowers feed, oh my goodness, like all sorts of beneficial insects, dozens of bee species, wasps, other butterflies, lady beetles, parasitic wasps that attack crop pests, pirate bugs, syrphid flies. I mean, there's a slew, an amazing number of insects that visit these flowers, in addition, of course, to the monarch butterfly caterpillars feeding them. And so thinking about milkweed in the landscape, but thinking about other host plants for butterflies is just super important. And there's a ton of resources out there, and I'll hit on those resources at the end to help you find those plants. But I think the kind of food 2.0, the piece of this where I begin to think about flowers as host plants, comes in when we're talking about specialist bees. So one thing Xerxes is trying to do more of is help people find resources to connect flowers that are visited by bees, where those bees maybe only visit one species or one genus or one family of flower. And there are a lot of sort of different genera of plants out there, like asters or native thistles, golden aster, the cucurbits, the sunflowers, hibiscus, which I think is a little more east than west. But primroses, willows is a really big one, vaccinium, the blueberries, violets. These are all plants whose flowers are visited by bees that maybe only visit that one species or genus. And if we add more of these flowers, these plants that are really geared towards specialist bees, we can, potentially really up the diversity of pollinators we might be seeing in our gardens. And so here's, a picture of a male willow plant. Oh, I'll say, because I don't have it anywhere else in this talk, willows are fantastic, thinking about those little shrubby pussy willows. And if you can, talk to your nurseries about getting male plants. It's a dioecious shrub. You've got female and male plants. And the male plants are the ones that produce all of this pollen, and it's the pollen that these specialist bees are looking for. Not to mention honeybees and all the rest of them. So yeah, see what you can do to find male willow plants. It's all you got to do is mark them and grab, pull from those, and you can have great stuff. So when it comes to planting, just to recap, focusing on native perennials, focusing on species with high pollinator value, having that succession of bloom times, thinking about butterfly host plants, site appropriate, choosing plants that are site appropriate, easy to establish, available, pesticide-free seed, etc. We're going to have more updated plant lists coming out from Xerxes soon. And I know the Conservation District's been thinking a lot about this and incorporating a lot of this into the seed mixes that they've got available. Okay, now we've got shelter. Bees need nesting, and I've talked about tunnel nesting and nest materials and ground nesting and bumblebees, etc. So you've already got a sense of this. And in thinking about the landscape, we need to think about retaining these natural or existing sites. We need to think about shrubs that have hollow stems and snags and bare ground and these overgrown, untidy areas. And I just want to sort of dwell on this a little bit. So bumblebees, for example, that nesting and overwintering, roots, brush piles, pine needles and leaves that build up, tall grasses and thatchy areas, places that have a lot of straw mulch or just undisturbed shrubby edges. These are the sorts of places, even big piles of pine needles, you have places where those queens can dig in, where they can set up nests, where they can overwinter. So I just want to just continue to think about get creative about where this might be in the landscape. You can manage tunnel nesting bees. You can put out nesting blocks and tunnels. That's super fun and it's super effective. I think it's important to remember that it really benefits and really needs, frankly, some sort of management, or just only putting them out in small clusters to prevent the buildup of pests over time. But there are some great resources. Here's one link that we've got, and I'll get these slides to the Conservation District to post with this talk. This is a great resource, Managing Alternative Pollinators, to understand how to manage these pests and manage diseases in these nests. But increasingly, Xerxes, we're really pushing people to think about those pithy stem shrubs that you could put in the landscape. Elderberry, caneberries, wild rose, ninebark, lilacs, all these different things. When those stems are cut, they open up a soft, pithy center that a lot of our bees will actually dig into and excavate out. And shoot, you could go, if you're growing raspberries right now and cut your canes back and leave them a couple feet high or a foot or two high, it's, within a year or two, you'll easily begin to see those bees nesting in those cavities. So another thing we think about, like I've talked about, Xerxes has talked about shrubs for a while, but we're also starting to think more and more about, say, wildflower stems or perennial stems in the garden. These are things that you could cut off again. Maybe you could, you just let them, instead of cutting them to the ground, those tough, woodier, pithy stems, you cut them a little bit, a foot or two long. Let's see, actually we can walk through this here. So if you've got the species with hollow or soft pith stems, you can leave the stalks, you can prune them and cut them to maybe 8 inches to 24 inches, and then over time watch to see what they do. You'll literally have bees move into those stems. And in fact, if you go out into wild areas now, you might even be able to find stems in natural areas like this and even find bees in them as you go around. It's actually a fun thing to do. And I don't know, I've had a good time doing that in the landscape and been able to find those for people when doing field tours. And then we need that winter cover. I talked about that. I talked about sort of what's naturally maybe out there. But in thinking about homes and gardens, there's been a big push lately on this sort of leave the leaves, or as I like to say, leave the leaves, or at least some of them. There are all sorts of caterpillars that like to tuck themselves into leaves for protection. Swallowtails, like this one here, will actually disguise themselves as dried leaves. As we've talked about, if you've got a garden where you've got your leaves piled up as mulch or under shrubs or around trees, these are places where bumblebee queens might dig in. You could spread them on vegetable or flower beds for soil building and weed protection. And I like this idea of sort of soft landings underneath trees and shrubs and perennials, just because there are a lot of insects that might be visiting those, particularly native shrubs and native trees. And they'll kind of want to overwinter and kind of crawl down and find these protected places, and a nice thick kind of leaf layer is sometimes a place where that'll happen. As you can imagine, avoiding shredding leaves is a good idea because you might have a lot of critters in there that you chop up, and that's not ideal. And then, okay, so those are some hacks and some other things, like some little details we've been thinking more and more about. And of course, I just want to touch briefly on pesticide protection. Because again, this is something when we're creating pollinator habitat, we need to be avoiding application of insecticides or fungicides straight on that habitat, or we need to worry about whether there's insecticides drifting onto that. So in a garden setting, ideally you wouldn't use pesticides as much as possible, but if you do use them, just minimize and be super targeted and read the guidance carefully, but be warned that a lot of those label instructions are geared more towards honeybees, and maybe they don't take into account the needs of native bees. Or other beneficial insects, or even butterflies. They might say spray at night, and you're going to have plenty of caterpillars on plants at night, for example. And so that wouldn't be protective of other pollinators. Xerxes has put out some new guidelines to help you buy bee-safe plants, because this is something that increasingly within the nursery trade, systemic insecticides that are taken up into wildflowers and garden flowers are just put onto these plants to keep them looking as pretty as possible. But some of those insecticides that are taken up into the plants come out in the pollen and nectar, and so we've got to be really careful about that. So we've got some new guidelines available to help homeowners and anybody really be able to buy those plants, bee-safe plants. Not to mention, or also guides to help nurseries really develop and offer bee-safe plants for sale. And I think when we're thinking about pest control, excuse me, when we create pollinator habitat, one of the amazing and I think kind of fun benefits is, as we start to look in those gardens and look in those plantings, you're going to see syrphid flies, you're going to see lady beetles, you're going to see lady beetle larvae and lacewings and minute pirate beetles. You're going to see lacewing larvae. You're going to see parasitized aphids and wasps and maybe ground beetles that are predaceous. All of these animals are out there eating crop pests, eating garden pests, eating cabbage looper and aphids, and those animals that are that few number of bad insects that are feeding on what we're trying to grow. And so by having this diverse ecosystem around our homes, around our gardens, around our farms, we're increasing the number of these other beneficial insects that are helping with pest control, which is super great. All right, so what I had a fun idea, and I'm not sure how well this is going to work, but this is a new idea. I was thinking, well, we're talking here, with you all, in Lake County, Montana, mostly. I thought, well, let me go to Google Maps and pull up like a random couple of spots in Lake County, and just talk about like where might we find some of these different habitat elements across the landscape. So this is, here we are somewhere on the east shore of Flathead Lake. I'm assuming, you all live there, and what I've always been pleasantly surprised to learn was kind of the cherry growing capital of Montana. So these are probably cherry blocks here over there on the east side of the lake. Last time I visited here was maybe 12 years ago, to give some talks at the extension center up there. And yeah, so I thought, well, let's pull up some cherry. And here I was, I pulled up this little section because I can imagine, for example, like you've got your cherries and, you're going to have some insecticide risk. If you're dealing with spotted ring Drosophila, even if you're organic, there's going to be some challenges there that we need to think about how to minimize drift and protect, say, the surrounding landscape. But you can imagine that a wood, like a little forest block like this, that's had pine needles and dropping for many years. I mean, this is the sort of place where if that duff layer has built up, you could have tremendous opportunities for bumblebee queens to be both overwintering in here and maybe even nesting along the edges where it's a little warmer and drier, where a little more sun is coming in. You could also imagine a scenario if you wanted to improve habitat that you could even, clear out some of the understory, which might reduce wildfire risk, and at the same time open it up to have some native shrubs come in, maybe even some native wildflowers growing in that understory. This could even become some forage food habitat as well. If you've got a homestead, kind of tucked in an orchard, you could imagine planting beautiful wildflower gardens in and around here. Again, we have to be cautious about trying to minimize drift onto those. But still, it's a great, you can imagine having little pockets of habitat here and there. These sort of wilder forested areas, if they're thinned out, this could be a spot with lots of shrubs that are in bloom in the springtime. And maybe even some areas that you could get some wildflowers in. You could imagine a lawn like this or an open area like this could be a place where you've got bees nesting in the ground, particularly if it's, as sunny as this looks, so maybe on a slope. And so some of these odd places here could be providing that. You might have even forage habitat kind of growing around here. Now, Sage, tell me, is my cursor pointing, like, is this working at all for you to kind of be visualizing this sort of landscape? This is totally me trying something new.
Yeah, no, I can see it looks good.
Okay, all right. Well, so this is an area with some cherry orchards. Oh, and you might also think like the cherries are going to have a ton of bloom in the early spring. So if you're creating habitat, you might be thinking about having bloom that comes on after the cherry, which might be a way to pull pollinators out from those blocks at a time when maybe you've got someone is treating, for spotted ring Drosophila or some other pest. We could think about pulling the bees out. Now, here's another area further south that, again, just if you happen to live here, that's totally like, it was not I randomly picked this spot. I really like this one because here we've got I'm assuming this is, well, actually, it's funny. I read this as, you could tell I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I read this as Sasquatch Ditch. It's not, obviously, but here's a landscape where you can imagine bringing those shrubs that are good for tunnel nesting bees, not to mention forage, planting that along one side of the drainage ditch or one side of the irrigation canal. Lots of challenges there with kind of management, but I like to push the irrigation districts, if they're with open canals like these, if we can have one side that's got, some sort of habitat on it and the other is nice and open with the roads, so you can keep it clean and cleared. I don't know, trying to find that compromise. But here, this farmstead, has got a lot of treed habitat along the edges of that. Plus, they've even put in some hedgerows, in and around some of their fields. So this is, again, hedgerows are a great way to get shrubs and trees and even have this sort of understory where bumblebees and other pollinators might be nesting or overwintering. In this landscape, again, I can imagine creating little pockets of meadow, of native wildflower meadows, or just formal gardens that have got good pollinator plants. These are cropped areas. We haven't talked a lot about, agriculture and cover cropping and things like that, but you can imagine incorporating some sort of a bee-friendly forage into a rotation, or having alfalfa, doing a bit of delayed harvest on some of your alfalfa for that to grow if you're growing alfalfa hay. I don't know. There's just a lot of different places in this landscape. This is looks a little more open range that could just be managed for some wildflowers. Like maybe we're just trying to seed something in and getting some diversity there, but letting some of this kind of become more overgrown, and then other areas that are more intensively managed to try to have pockets where you might have that nice organic layer for, say, bumblebees to nest in. Or maybe you've got some dry slopes here, you could be keeping your eyes open for tunnel nests. Ground nesting bees. I don't know. I think just keeping your eyes open for these different habitat types in the landscape is kind of one of my main points that I want you all to take away from this. That, hey, having your eyes open for pithy stem shrubs and breaking off stems and looking for those, or looking at the ground in the spring and early summer for where there might be bare patches and bees nesting, or where you might have these bumblebees finding a nook. I mean, this is what I'm hoping, at the very least, you come away from this talk with some, your eyes a little more finely tuned. So to help with all this, as we begin to wrap up, Xerxes has put together a number of different habitat assessment guides that you can download online. I'll put a couple of links in the chat box here as we wrap up and as we move into questions. And so a lot of these we built for farm and agricultural landscapes and natural areas, but recently put together some really nice guidelines for yards and gardens and parks. And so, you can see these and get these online, and they help kind of walk you through. Actually, I'll look at it here. Thinking about foraging habitat, thinking about nesting habitat, thinking about pesticide practices, and also thinking about community action, which, to kind of come full circle, this is, I don't know, I feel like this talk is part of community action, in Lake County. And so I just want to come back to that pollinator initiative that, they've rolled out, and having the seed available for you all to work with, and even being able to go out and, I don't know, Sage, if this is still going on, but I thought it was great to be able to check out these local pollinator plots, where these, some examples of these, so you can see what this looks like and get kind of excited about it. And hopefully, from my perspective, get out there and see bees and just be amazed, not just at the beauty of these different flowers, but at all these animals, these tiny little animals, each of which has its own little story, that are going to be out there visiting those plants. And so I think, I just encourage you to dig more into that and take advantage of that, because it's that local community action that, I don't know, part of something bigger, and it's fun, and you get to see what other people are doing and get inspired with different ideas. To help support this kind of work, Xerxes has put together a ton of resources. We've got all sorts of books on native pollinators, and 100 plants to feed the bees, and gardening for butterflies, and farming for native beneficial insects. This is just a few of the books we put out in the last decade or so, and hundreds of fact sheets and brochures and guidelines and reports to help. And a lot of this you can get by just going to our Pollinator Conservation Resource Center. And I'll put this link in the box so you all can get to that and find additional regional plant lists and conservation guides and nest guides, links to identification guides, pesticide help, native plant nursery information. It's just meant to be a place where you could go and really kind of get the resources you need. I also want to say, for those of you who've got working lands, your farmers, ranchers, orchardists, I'm sure most of you already know about the NRCS, but if you don't, the NRCS in Montana has done a ton to set up materials, guidelines, technical support, financial assistance around pollinators, and all across the state. And the folks I work with at the state office there have been phenomenal. You just have some great people who are really interested in supporting pollinator conservation in Montana. So if you're interested in more technical assistance, maybe you're outside of Lake County, or maybe the Conservation District already works pretty closely with their local NRCS office, I just highly recommend reaching out to the NRCS for additional technical support. And with that, just so you know, we get my funding obviously comes a lot from NRCS, but Xerxes gets a lot of funding from members. So you could consider donating, becoming a member. My executive director would think me remiss if I didn't just let you all know that, we're a membership-based organization, and you can support our mission if you want. And with that, I think just to wrap up, I just want to, highlight the fact that all of us can be doing fun things, I think, to help bees and other pollinators, creating beautiful landscape, reducing pollution in the landscape, really strengthening community relationships, and I don't know, just having a good time putting plants out there and just watching the amazing diversity that comes to visit them. So with that, why don't we kind of wrap up here and take some questions?
Sounds great. I can go ahead and read off the questions. So the first one says, are you aware of what kind of work / project areas Xerxes does in New Hampshire, which is their home state?
Oh, right on. A ton. Oh my goodness. I almost don't know where to begin. We've got staff in New Hampshire. We're soon to have 2 staff in New Hampshire in Dover, and then over soon on the west side of the state. And these folks are working a lot in habitat creation, mostly with NRCS. These are partner biologists with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they are helping with habitat creation, habitat management, and a lot of reduced risk pesticide work, what we call integrated pest and pollinator management, to help the farm community there, orchards, berry fields, vegetable crops, reduce impacts of pest management on pollinators and other beneficial insects. It's been a really fantastic collaboration with the local farm community and with the NRCS, including several partnerships with conservation districts there, putting out demonstration habitat and demonstrating these different techniques. So it's, I don't know, it's a sort of, there's a lot of work going on the ground. And if you wanted to reach out to Sage, I could help connect, your family or community back in New Hampshire, if you'd like, with folks who are doing this kind of work on the ground there.
Great. And yeah, I was actually going to leave my email in the chat box if anyone has any questions or wants to get connected or questions about the pollinator initiative. I'd be happy to help with that. But it looks like the only other question we have is, oh, actually we have 2 now, 2 more questions. So the first one is, where do honeybees / tree nesting bees fit in with the 3 broad categories?
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing about honeybees. They are so different from all of those 3,600 native species in the US. They're their own category altogether. So whereas that bumblebee colony, which is the closest, sort of most similar, the bumblebee needs, something that's maybe the size of a softball or 2 in volume, right, to set up that nest. Whereas a honeybee, and I used to do honeybee research, that's how I got into this all maybe 25 or 30 years ago. Honeybee, they ideally want a 40-liter, basically 40 quarts cavity in a tree. Like, that's their dream. And so, to have honeybees naturally occurring in the landscape, they need much bigger cavities. And they would have naturally been in old trees that would have died and rotted from the inside out. I mean, that would have been the most common place to find honeybees, back in the day. So pretty different when it comes to, sort of natural nesting cavities. So I mean, so if you wanted to have natural nesting habitat for these European honeybees, you need to have big cavities out there in the woods. I mean, that's what they evolved to nest in. So yeah, pretty different from all of our native species.
Nice. That's very interesting. So then our last question. Oh, just kidding. We got another one now. Keep coming. So this question is, when you talk about solitary bees, does that imply that they are on the land at a low population density? If you have only a small pollinator habitat patch, can you really expect it to support a population large enough for viability?
Yeah, short answer is yes, absolutely. So the population density actually can be really quite high. Just because they're solitary, many of those quote unquote solitary bees will nest in big aggregations. Like I gave that story of the Tickle Bees. We've got, tens of thousands of bees nesting within an acre or 2. And I've had situations where I cleared away, I did some really intense weeding in my front yard several years ago in a real sunny patch. But the timing was just right for some reason. And all of a sudden, I was out there literally drinking a beer at sunset, looking out, and noticed that there were probably, I don't know, there were tens, not quite 100, but tens of little sweat bees that had found this patch, thought it was great, and started, nesting in the ground right there. And so, even if you've got small patches, they add up, and you can have potentially a lot of bees nesting. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. A lot of places are just going to have nothing, and then all of a sudden you'll find some south-facing slope or some really dry or warm area where they're just really abundant. And so it's a little bit hit or miss in the landscape. But if you keep your eyes open, it's surprising kind of where they show up and where they nest. And what we found is when we create areas of habitat and good food, that those nests are more successful. So we've got research, for example, in the Central Valley of California, where we've planted hedgerows and watched the bee community, so both the diversity, the variety of species, and the number of species steadily just go up year after year when they've got a consistent food source and a consistent area that's not being disturbed. And so they're going to be nesting potentially widely around there. But it's kind of amazing how those numbers, we can literally watch them go up, increase when we've got stable, high quality habitat in a landscape over time.
Well, that's really good to hear. So moving on to our last question. It says, do you have any outreach programs for schools?
Oh my goodness. Okay, the timing of that is impeccable. We've on our website, and I'll remind me, Sage, we've got links to different educational materials. We've kind of pulled together different curricula we know about that's out there. So we've got that assembled in one place, and I can share that. But two things come to mind. One, we're just about to release a program called X-Kids, which is really a program geared towards schools, geared towards families that are really just fired up about insects and pollinators and diversity. We've just got a whole program called X-Kids with a whole curriculum and learning package that's all about to launch. I feel like any time. In fact, I almost wonder if it hasn't already, because it's not a program that I manage. And like I said at the beginning, we're getting to be pretty big, and it's hard even for me to keep on top of everything. But X-Kids is something, Xerxes Kids, X-Kids is something to keep your eyes out for that I think could potentially be just what you're looking for, really geared towards at least giving teachers and parents a lot of materials to have a fun way to learn about important pollinators and important insects. Get kids kind of fired up and give them a whole bunch of activities to work on. I will say, and this goes back 5 to 10 years, Montana, like the only state I know of that has done this, literally put together a whole curriculum for schools. I had a whole package. They worked with me. I got them a bunch of materials to be able to include in packets for teachers. And the state of Montana, through I guess it was the Natural Resources Department, had a really fun and really interesting, really supportive program for schools around pollinator conservation. So I don't think that that's still underway, but I could try to dig into the sort of the Wayback Machine and see what I could find. For that. And that might just be something to look for, just to even do some Google searching on Montana pollinators schools. They pulled together a lot of really nice materials. We're trying to support that for a couple of years. So it was pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, going off of schools, another question is, does Xerxes offer internships for college students?
We talk about this. Someday this will happen. We haven't yet, because we've been so technically focused. We haven't had sort of a good program that would have that nice mix of like learning experiences for college students, where you could do something that you felt like you were really contributing, that wasn't just kind of grunt work. And it's a lot to manage. And for there were 20 years ago, just 5 of us. Even if we're 70 now, I mean, we've been busy. And it takes a lot of work to really, I think, offer internships that are rewarding for those that are participating. But we're talking about it, thinking about it, and trying to think about how we could create something that's actually a paid internship, so that you'd be able to have it be something where you get paid to be able to do the work and get the experience. So at the moment, the short answer is sadly no. but we do have it as a dream, as something we'd like to do in the next couple of years. So it looks like timing is probably not ideal for you.
Something to look forward to in the future. Well, I believe that is all of our questions. I just want to say thank you so much for all of your time and your knowledge. Really appreciate it. And it was wonderful to hear from you. I did want to say, if anyone would want to revisit these slides, I will be posting them on the website under the events page. So if you have any troubles finding that, just send me a message. We will be having another speaker in February on the last Wednesday of the month, and there will also be a live screening at 9 Pipes Lodge. So we would love to have you all there if you're in the area. Mace, did you have anything else that you wanted to say?
One thing I meant to do, and it's just hard to kind of go back and forth. I'm going to copy and paste into the chat just a number of different links to different materials, to some of the things I pointed to, just so you all have, for those of you who are still on, you can click on these and just see kind of some of the stuff that's out there, just making it easy for you. Here, I'll even put the Lake County Pollinator Initiative again. 1 second, I got that up in there. So just a bunch of links into the chat box for you all to, kind of see what's out there, explore a little bit, and kind of get right to some of these different resources. I could put a link too to our pollinator habitat signs, but I'm pretty sure you guys have got some sweet signs. So maybe I'll leave that one off.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mace. Again, really appreciate having you here. Definitely a treat hearing from the Xerxes Society.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining in, sticking with us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We'll be signing off now. I hope everyone has a great rest of their night.
All right. Cheers, y'all.